Thomas Gilbert, hello.
Hello.
Welcome to Manhappalacia, show about rustic, urban, and polished rural. And you have written a book, Thomas Gilbert, and I have discovered it called How Baseball Happened. And here it is. It's a very nice looking book, very nice looking, and about the origin of baseball in New York City, in the heart of New York City. It's old New York City, 200 years ago, New York City,
Mhm.
250 years ago, New York City. But it's New York City. It's not outskirts. It's not hinterland. It's in the heart of New York City. How did you play baseball growing up?
Yes, I did. I was a pitcher and I blew my arm out by the time I was about 14. But
Curveballs or fastballs?
I was just throwing, I didn't know what I was doing. I was throwing as hard as I could, and sometimes I got them out, and sometimes I didn't. I walked a lot of guys.
Where did you play Little League Baseball?
Weston, Connecticut.
And when did you move to New York City?
When I was about 20, so 45 years ago.
And you've been in New York City ever since?
I love it here, and I'm not leaving.
When did you first have the thesis about the origins of baseball in Lower Manhattan? When did that first kind of sort of matriculate in your brain?
Well, I'm interested in history. I always have been. And I'm always curious about the history of family and about place. And basically, moving to New York, I sort of fell in love with baseball as an adult, even though I played it growing up. I wasn't much of a fan as a kid. I was more interested in my pitching than what the Yankees were doing. But when in my 20s, I started going to a lot of Yankee games and I thought that the history of New York and Brooklyn and the history of baseball were two different subjects in the beginning, but they're very intertwined. And then what really gets my curiosity going is when you realize how wrong the conventional history is about something. And baseball history is very distorted by the history of the major league and professional baseball, which has its own agenda, right? And it's not that interested in where it came from. It's interested in selling something. And this is part of the reason why I wrote the book, because baseball denies fundamental truths about its own history and origins. And part of the reason is that, it annoys people that it happened in New York and Brooklyn. And, when I say those two places, they used to be two cities. And the competition between them was a really important factor in early baseball. But um, baseball traveled this evolutionary path from a game to a sport, and it did it really quickly. In fact, in about 10 years, in the middle of which we fought
What
the
were the
Civil
10
War.
years? What between what year and what year?
Well, in 1855, baseball was only played in Lower Manhattan and within about a 20-mile radius. In 1865, it was the national pastime, and that's what everyone was calling it. And they were playing it from California to New Orleans to Chicago to Maine. Yeah, and in the middle of that, what else happened? We fought the Civil War, in which sports stopped for 4 or 5 years. So it happened in a flash. It was a very quick event.
I see.
It was a wildfire. It was not a gradual spread. And then, what I was saying about Major League Baseball is that when it comes to marketing a sport as entertainment, which is not how it started as something people did. And when it became something people paid to watch, it wasn't a good thing from the point of view of marketing that it was so New York centric,
Right.
right? I mean, you're selling it as the national game. Nobody wants to hear that it was started by a bunch of bankers and lawyers in Manhattan.
Has Coopertown completely, do they hate you or do they shrug their shoulders or do they embrace you somehow?
I'm feeling fairly embraced by them at this point. They've come a long way, and they used to. I mean, the people there are serious about baseball history, so they're very cooperative, and I love the people up there, and they help me. Um, if you went back a few decades, there was some hostility toward the true origins of baseball up there because the whole reason it's in Cooperstown is based on not just a misunderstanding, it's a complete lie. And it's a stupid lie.
Even Major League Baseball, it looks like Major League Baseball would invite you to A, B, C, D, E, F, G and have you speak for 15, 20, 29 minutes. And does that happen or not?
No, it doesn't happen.
At all?
No.
But does
I
Major
mean,
League Baseball do they have an opinion or have they released a statement regarding your book?
well, no, although like I said, their official historian, who's an employee of Major League Baseball, he wrote my foreword. But it's not that I feel any hostility from them. I think in general, they're not very interested in what happened before they existed. Let me put it that way. I mean, sometimes, I could tell you some stories, but the baseball's owned by a bunch of really, really rich people who aren't baseball, and they have their own feelings about things. And some of them feel like they own history. They bought a baseball team, they own the history too, and they don't.
For several years they did, didn't they?
Yeah, and do you remember that? And for years, for most of our lifetimes, they used to have Cincinnati Reds play the first game of the season. And I have a chapter about why that's complete BS. They did it because to honor supposedly the Cincinnati Red Stockings of the 1860s as the first professional team. And it's still called that in reference books and histories. It has no truth at all to it. It's fun to write about things like this. It's fun to debunk things, and it's fun to tell the real story.
In your research, who is the first professional baseball team?
Well, it's a tie. It's a tie between about 7 or 8 teams because, it's more interesting why the lie was told than what the truth is. And I would say this is something that if you ever do genealogy, you're going to find out is true for people too. Facts are just facts. They're kind of random. Lies are really interesting. They're always told for a reason, right? I mean, when people ask me, how could the Cooperstown story and the Abner Doubleday story be so untrue? And you say, well, there's no point in wasting time trying to find, talk about why it's untrue or how it's untrue. Why it was told is interesting because it was basically about marketing professional baseball and marketing it as a patriotic institution. And we've forgotten that baseball used to be a little less secure about its position in society. And way back when it was competing with other sports. So what happened in 1907 was that Henry Chadwick, who was born in England and was the most prominent baseball journalist and a real establishment figure, he started saying that he thought baseball came from an English children's game called Rounders. And this is not true. He was wrong, but he believed it. And he was kicking it around kind of semi-seriously. And Albert Spalding, who was the de facto robber baron ruler of baseball, the founder of the National League and the Cubs, got really annoyed by this. And he basically appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission whose job was not to investigate the origins of baseball, but to find an American who invented it and make up a plausible story. So the whole point is, if it was invented by an American in 1839 somewhere, it couldn't be English. That was the whole point of the story.
Right.
And then associating with small town America was a plus.
In your opinion, Thomas, the first instance, perhaps, and I know it's impossible to know, but the first instance where you hit a ball and you run to the first base on a diamond, that is essentially, and there are fielders. When did that happen?
Okay, so we don't know, but I'll tell you what makes baseball baseball, because there's bat and ball games all over the world. There's 3 things that make it different from everything else. And one is 3 guys are out, they're all out. In every other type of baseball and bat and ball game, everybody bats in an inning. That's true of cricket and rounders and almost everything else. Okay, so 3 out, all out. Then there's foul territory and fair territory. None of the other sports have any foul territory.
Why is there foul territory and why is there fair territory?
We don't know exactly. But there's suspicions, but it probably had to do with lack of space. When you think about kids' games,
which is a New York City thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But you know what the byproduct of it was? If you ever watch a cricket game on TV, it's in the middle of a big oval, and they have to use a telephoto lens. You're miles from the action. And if you're sitting in the park, you can't see anything.
Wait,
Now,
Thomas, I interrupted you. What's the third thing? One thing is
oh,
three outs and you're out.
the third thing is really fun because it makes the game so complex. The distinction between reaching base and scoring. In all the other bat and ball games, you either run all the way around the sticks or the bases and score, or back and forth in cricket, or you don't. You're out. And baseball has men on base who don't score, which makes a lot of things complex and interesting, like defense and statistics. Right? The whole problem with evaluating hitting is, you know, you get a hit, you should be credited for it. But what if you don't score? What if the guy behind you doesn't drive you in? In cricket, this is not a problem. There's runs and there's outs.
Brilliant. And you are brilliant to have deduced, to have made such a, again, you're not so much saying that it was invented in Lower Manhattan, which it was, and that's
Yeah.
kind of an understood thing, courtesy of your book. But you're also debunking and processing and analyzing the lie. Why was the lie told? Why did it gain currency? And even the gentlemanliness of the game is very cool to feel. And you go back in time and you get to experience New York City. It's as good as a Ken Burns. I want Ken Burns, ding dang. I wish Ken Burns, when he did his baseball documentary, had a copy of your book. That would have colored, that would have lent additional profundity to his documentary.
Possibly. I mean, I would love it if someone would do a, you know, new history of early baseball, and it would be fun. And
Has anyone contacted you?
no, I've got higher hopes for my current book. I'm writing a book about Jim Creighton, the first pitcher, and I think that makes a better film.
That's good.
It's a life story, and it's also tragic, and it's really new and interesting.
Oh, that's good. Jim, when are you finishing it?
It'll be out a year from March, so 2026
So
spring.
you're still writing it?
I'm finishing it up right now. Yeah.
Ooh, put me
It's
on
a,
the list, please. I
it's a
beg
cold
you.
pace. It's fun. I mean, we were talking about baseball denying its own history. Just a few highlights. The first ballpark was in Brooklyn in 1862. The first pitcher was a kid in Brooklyn named Jim Creighton, who I'm writing a book about. He invented pitching. The idea that
Wait. He invented pitching?
he did. So if you played slow pitch softball, you get it. In early baseball, the pitchers had to throw underhand, and they couldn't bend their wrists and they couldn't throw. What they called throwing is really whipping your arm.
Right.
So dead underhand, like you're throwing horseshoes, and that's why it's called pitching. People don't know this. Throwing was illegal. If you threw the ball underhand like a modern fast pitch softball pitcher, you were breaking the rules.
But how was he allowed to throw it when the rules at the time were pitching?
Well, he didn't throw it. Now, there's a controversy about it, but what I'm arguing is that he was pitching perfectly legally, but he made this breakthrough, and part of it is technical, but he was a great athlete. I mean, he was sort of Jim Thorpe. He was great at everything he did, and what he did was he figured out how to pitch, and he figured out how to throw a curveball, which has been forgotten, and it's fun to read descriptions of people who batted against him or who watched him, and they have no idea what's going on. They cannot tell what he's doing or how he's doing it. It's fun.
Thomas Gilbert, you are the grand master of baseball. I keep showing it because it's a wonderful looking book. I'm not even a reader.
Book, and it was designed by my friend Jerry Kelly.
I'm not even a reader, and I can't put the book down. Thomas Gilbert, you have been a fantabulous guest on Manhapalacia. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'd love to do it again. There's a lot to talk about.
We may set that up very quickly.